family rise up during the same. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I request you to kindly stand for the national song followed by the national anthem.
वन्दे मातरम् वन्दे मातरम् सुजलां सुफलां मलयज शीतलां शस्यश्यामलां मातरं वन्दे मातरम् शुभ्रज्योत्सनां पुलकितयामिनी फुल्लकुसुमितद्रुमदलशोभिनी सुहासिनी सुमधुरभाषिणी सुखदां वरदां मातरं वन्दे मातरम् कोटि कोटि कंठ कलकलनिनाद कराले कोटि कोटि भुजैर्हित खर करवाले अबला के नमायित बले बहुबल धारिणी नमामि तारिणी रिपुदलवारिणी मातरं वन्दे मातरम् तुमि विद्या तुमि धर्म तुमि हृदि तुमि मर्म त्वं हि प्राणा शरीरे बाहुते तुमि मा शक्ति हृदये तुमि मा भक्ति तुम्हारे प्रतिमा गणि मंदिरे मंदिरे वन्दे मातरम् त्वं हि दुर्गा दश प्रहरणधारिणी कमला कमलदलविहारिणी वाणी विद्यादायिनी नमामि कमलां ममलानतुलां सुजलां सुफलां मातरं वन्दे मातरम् श्यामलां सरलां सुस्मितां भूषितां धरणीं भरणीं मातरं वन्दे मातरम् वन्दे मातरम् जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल गंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Honorable Governor of Bihar, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain, PVSM, UISM, AVSM, SM, VSM and Bar, Mrs. Sabiha Hasnain, Chief of Air Staff Air Chief Marshal AP Singh, PVSM, AVSM, Mrs. Sarita Singh, Dr. Sanjay Baru, family members of Air Commodore Jasjeet Singh, his sons, Captain Ajay Singh, and Vice Admiral Sanjay Jasjeet Singh, Mrs. Reena Singh, Mrs. Zareen Singh, and Mr. Adiraj. Members of the defense and strategy community, academia, and the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to the 9th edition of the Jasjeet Singh Memorial Lecture today. Air Commodore Jasjeet Singh's legacy lives on as one of the most revered voices in the corridors of strategic decision making. Rightfully, he along with Dr. Subramaniam are credited with the creation of the ecosystem for Indian strategic studies. For all of us, Air Commodore Jasjeet Singh was the first quintessential soldier scholar. A practitioner who turned military experience into doctrine, policy, critique, and long-term institutional capacity. The Center for Aerospace Power and Strategic Studies was set up by the Air Commodore on 15 September 2001 as a research think tank, and this year, CAPS, as we call ourselves, is celebrating its silver jubilee. Over the past decade, India's foreign policy has undergone a significant transformation. Under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister, India has emerged as one of the fastest growing major economies, steadily positioning itself as a leading global power. This rise has naturally elevated the importance of our immediate neighborhood in shaping our strategic outlook. At the core of India's foreign policy lie two articulated guiding principles: national interest and the idea of Vishwa Bandhu, or a friend to the world. These two were merged and brought together when India renewed its focus through the Neighbourhood First policy in 2014. However, despite the intent, inconsistent engagement in the past, and sometimes even today, has created space for external factors to expand their influence in the region. As a result, India's neighborhood presents a complex and evolving challenge. Many countries in South Asia are grappling with serious economic difficulties, high debt, inflation, slow growth. Alongside this, we are witnessing political transitions, social unrest, notably assertive youth-led movements as seen in countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and of course, our very own of a few days back. Compounding this is a structural imbalance. India's size and power relative to its neighbors often creates a sense of asymmetry, sometimes leading to regional anxiety. With the exception of Bhutan, much of the neighborhood is in flux. Afghanistan presents a unique challenge under Taliban rule. Pakistan continues to face internal instability and the consequences of policies that have fostered extremism. At the same time, China's expanding presence in South Asia, particularly through its strategic engagement with Pakistan, has added a new layer of complexity to India's regional environment. These developments have serious security implications, from the spread of extremism to potential spillover effects in India's own border regions. India has responded to these challenges by being the first helping hand in crisis, by promising regional trade, enhancing connectivity, and sharing digital public infrastructure. Budgetary commitments, including substantial allocations for overseas development assistance, further reinforce this approach. However, the critical question remains: how should India navigate a neighborhood that is simultaneously unstable, competitive, and strategically contested? This requires careful balance between engagement and restraint, leadership and sensitivity, and strategic competition and cooperation. To expound further on this conundrum, and we have today amongst us the Honorable Governor of Bihar, Lieutenant General Sayyadata Hasnain. I'll now hand over to Dr. Sanjay Baru, founder truster of the Forum for National Security Studies and a former member of the National Security Advisory Board, to make his opening remarks and set the stage for the distinguished general. Over to you, sir.
His Excellency General Atta Hasnain, Air Chief, former Air Chief, Mr. Kapoor, three former Director Generals of CAPS whom I see in the audience, faculty of CAPS, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure once again to welcome you all this morning to the 9th Jasjit Singh Memorial Lecture. Our founder chairman of FNSS, which is the trust that set up CAPS, Shri M.K. Rasgotra, who is presently 102 years old, is not able to join us. He excused himself from his position as chairman of the board, and therefore I have taken his place. And I'm grateful to the trustees of FNSS for this honor. This morning is a morning where we are here with two persons whom I regard as friends. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh, whom I've known for more than almost 30 years now, was a friend. He used to insist that we should call him Jasjit. Never sir, never Air Commodore, just say, call me Jasjit. And so he is part of our life as just Jasjit. General Atta Hasnain, who is now Governor of Bihar, is someone I've traveled with Mrs. Hasnain, and we spent some nice evenings together. So I regard him also as a friend and welcome him this morning. As Air Marshal Kapoor mentioned, both Air Commodore Jasjit Singh and General Atta Hasnain are best described as scholar warriors. In fact, General Hasnain has written a lot on being a scholar warrior. And many years ago, it was Chanakya who said, battles are not fought in the battlefield, but in the minds of generals. He echoed a thought of, which I discovered recently, of Joan of Arc, who said all battles are first won or lost in the mind. Both Jasjit and General Hasnain are distinguished, not just as great soldiers, not just for their contribution to India's defense and to the leadership of the armed forces, but as scholars who have written substantially. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh's work spans over 25 years of scholarship. I have had the opportunity of being in several conferences and seminars with him, traveled with him around the world, and he put in enormous effort into intellectually convincing the rest of the world with regard to our national interests. What constitutes India's national security? What constitutes India's national interest? When India declared itself a nuclear weapons state and we were subject to sanctions, both by the United States and Japan, the National Security Advisor Brajesh Mishra sent a delegation of the Institute for Defense Studies both to Washington and to Tokyo to convince think tanks in both those countries as to why India went nuclear. What exactly are India's security challenges? I had the opportunity of accompanying Air Commodore Jasjit Singh to both those visits and to many others. And I stand here today, this morning, once again, as I've done in the last couple of years, to salute his memory as a scholar warrior. General Atta Hasnain, a BA in history honors from St. Stephen's College, passed out of the Indian Military Academy in 1974, very distinguished military career. I believe you worked, sir, in a regiment that your father raised. And he comes from a family of soldiers. About a decade ago, when I was working for the International Institute for Strategic Studies. The IISS had a conference in Colombia on the theme of Latin American security. And the Director General of the IISS called me and said that, look, the focus of this conference is going to be largely on internal security in different parts of Latin America. Can you think of someone in India with hands-on experience with internal security? I had by then heard much about the tremendous leadership and contribution that General Hasnain had made in the management of the situation in Kashmir, as a scholar warrior, as a humane leader of his forces, winning over the hearts and minds of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And his reputation reached me before I met him, so I could think of no one else but him to invite to Colombia, and we traveled together to Colombia for this international conference. So I feel particularly honored and grateful this morning to welcome General Hasnain to address this audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Slide shift to pointers.
Can I be heard at the back? Clear at the back? Thank you very much for that. Good morning and Jai Hind. Air Marshal AP Singh, PVSM, AVSM, Air Marshal Nagesh Kapoor, SYSM, PVSM, AVSM, VM, Mr. Sanjay Baru, Jalal Chauhan, I just happened to see you, notice there, welcome, the former CDS, former Air Chiefs, distinguished Commanders-in-Chief, present and the past, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's indeed a privilege to have been invited to deliver the Air Commodore Jasjit Singh Memorial Lecture. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh was much more than just an outstanding officer of the Indian Air Force. He was among the pioneers who brought strategic studies into the mainstream national discourse. Through his scholarship, so eloquently described just now by Dr. Baru, institution building and intellectual leadership, he helped generations of practitioners and analysts think beyond the immediate and the obvious. It is therefore both an honor and a responsibility to speak in his memory today. I am particularly delighted that his son, Vice Admiral Sanjay Singh, SYSM, the DGUSI, is present with us. His presence makes this occasion even more meaningful, and he happens to be a very good friend of mine. My sincere thanks to the Chief of the Air Staff for this opportunity, to the Director General and the entire team at the Center for Aerospace and Strategic Studies for organizing this memorial lecture, and to my many friends in the Indian Air Force who I can see sitting here, the Blue Fraternity, with whom I have had shared decades of professional camaraderie and mutual respect. Before I begin, let me make one request. I've consciously tried to keep this talk grounded. I'm aware that this is being telecast to a lot of stations where people who are not so well steeped into the tradition of understanding geopolitics and strategic affairs are also viewing and listening to this. So, strategic studies often acquires a vocabulary that can appear intimidating to those not immersed in geopolitics or military affairs. My endeavor this morning is to simplify rather than complicate. I could have followed the conventional format normally followed in memorial lectures of reading from a prepared text, which is the correct thing to do, and hoping that everyone remains with me throughout. But however, instead of that, I've chosen to use a PowerPoint presentation, 33 slides for you. The subject I'm addressing is inherently geographical, and without maps, much of what I wish to convey would lose both clarity and context. Military professionals, as we are, most of us, perhaps more than anywhere else, are comfortable thinking through maps. And that is the approach I propose to adopt today. Only while discussing China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and to an extent the Indo-Pacific, will I occasionally refer to a brief written script. Those sections constitute the core of some of my arguments, and I would like to present those with precision. This lecture is not about India's neighbors, just neighbors. It's about India's strategic neighborhood and the need to redefine it in an era of geopolitical transformation. This approach of looking at the expanded neighborhood would be the best way to honor the memory of the iconic personality from whom this lecture takes its name. The aim here, as always taught to us at this famous staff college, is to leave you thinking differently about the strategic neighborhood and India's approach to it through the medium of geography and the study of influence. This presentation itself unfolds in 3 distinct acts, and I did want to demonstrate that I do understand a bit of artificial intelligence, so I managed to make a slide out of AI. The first act seeks to challenge some of our traditional assumptions about India's strategic environment. That is changing the paradigm. The second applies that framework to different regions around us, that is applying the paradigm. And the third asks a simple question: what must India do to align its strategic ambitions with its growing national capabilities? That's what must India do, the third act. With that, let us begin by looking at how this presentation is structured, and that's exactly the way it is: Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. We'll go to Act 1, the paradigm, changing the paradigm. And obviously, it has to start the military way, that is, with a map, or set of maps. You can see that all around India, there are areas of interest. If you look on the left map, you'll see, starting from the Suez Canal, the Cape of Good Hope, the Bab el-Mandab, so active these days because of the Houthis, the Straits of Hormuz, so active because of the Iran-US-Israel standoff, and the Straits of Malacca, the ever-present threat that we always anticipate. If you look to the right, you will find landmarks, countries all around, far beyond our immediate neighborhood. So the point which one is making is that as India is no longer merely a South Asian power managing neighbors, it is an ever-emerging civilizational and a maritime power managing a strategic ecosystem, stretching from the Mediterranean approaches to the Western Pacific. This is not changing, is it? Oh, yeah, okay. To the Western Pacific, that's where our broad interests lie. So India's neighborhood is no longer defined by contiguous land borders, which is what the common mindset of people in India has always been. That when you say neighborhood, it essentially defines the area with which we have contiguous land borders. And we are essentially a land-centric, a continental power, a land-centric thinking power, and that has been the limit of our thinking. But now, as you can see, it is defined actually by the geography of India's interests. What does the geography include? The map on top, you'll see South Asia as the neighborhood. That is the mindset we always had earlier. But as we are emerging beyond, as we are looking to becoming a middle power, an effective middle power, which we are already a middle power, expanding beyond our influence, our minds were restricted to South Asia only being the neighborhood. Now you can see that from the continental borders to the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, Central Asia, where the old great game was played and the new great game is on today. I recently visited it and I shall speak about it. The Bay of Bengal, ASEAN, the Western Pacific, and this is all that forms the strategic neighborhood. What is affected by this? The expansion, why does our expansion of our interests take place? Obviously, these 9 things slated out on this slide are significant for our thinking. Trade. We are looking at expansion of trade with the United States expanding up to something to the tune of $500 billion. Much of our trade to Europe, the Middle East, goes through these choke points. Much of our trade to the ASEAN countries goes through the choke point of the Straits of Malacca. We are looking at energy. We are a net energy importer. 80% of our energy requirements come from different parts of the world. 45% of it comes from the Middle East, from West Asia. And you've seen already how we have been affected by the choke points in West Asia. Technology, the expansion of technology. It's not just a question of online technology or knowledge of technology, it's technology in physicality. Supply chains, which have to keep our industry going. Diaspora, very important element. 10 million of them in the Middle East, in West Asia, providing $50 billion worth of remittances every year. We're looking at maritime security for all our trade and our island territories, our coastal areas. We're looking at terrorism, which at the moment lies low, but the potential of a second wave or a third wave coming in always exists. There is cyber, the underwater sea cables, etc. There is space above. All this goes into forming the ecosystem, which is that of our strategic neighborhood. Why does it matter? Expanding this further. Added 2 things at the end. You'll find 3 additional things on this slide. Critical minerals, very, very important in the future, chip technology, etc. Conflict with different nations. Particularly, I've focused on China. China is the last one. China and the threats from China, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. We cannot just sit restricted with this so-called string of pearls around us unless we push outwards and go beyond to contest China, counter China in the various domains in which China attempts to push us. I think one of the most important books of recent times was this book, The Revenge of Geography. And if you have read it, you will realize that there are 5 issues, particularly about India, which Robert Kaplan talks about. Continental fetters, which means that land border threats perpetually divert resources away from the blue water power projection. Admiral Raja Menon wrote on this 20 years ago when he expounded the theory of India being a continental power and not a maritime power, and the need for India to be a maritime power. The fact that we are land-centric in our thinking, territory forms a very important part of our overall psyche. That's the first issue. The second, choke point at captivity. Entirely, energy and economic security remain entirely hostage to narrow maritime gateways, and I've just spoken about them, the Straits of Malacca, the Bab el-Mandab, the Straits of Hormuz. A pivotal power trap, trapped by geographical proximity to volatile states, in this case, Pakistan, China, both land-centric, essentially land-centric. And then, now emerging, Bangladesh, too, forcing a localized crisis management over global strategy. The thinking always is first on territory, and then reluctantly thinking to go beyond. The buffer state erosion, the collapse of traditional geographic buffers like Tibet, which existed always there between India and China, but that eroded, leaving India directly exposed to hostile continental powers. And then the Indian Ocean crucible, physical centrality in the Indian Ocean basin commands dominance but invites intense naval encirclement, which is one of the reasons why you're looking at a theaterization of the entire maritime resources down into the peninsular region. So these are 5 issues which are essential as far as geography is concerned. But the term today, we need not be restricted by geography. Travel, online capability, connectivity, etc., has led to a newfound strategic terminology called geometry. There's nothing new about geometry. It's very much a mathematical term. But in geopolitical terms, geometry. Geography defines location, but geometry defines relationships. Geography is static, while geometry is relational. How have you been able to establish relations? And if you look at the 6 issues which I brought out for you, all 6 of them point out primarily to how you can overcome geography and the revenge of geography. Connectivity, roads, ports, corridors, digital networks, logistics, partnerships. Going for strategic partnerships increasingly matter more than physical adjacency. It's not necessary to be next to each other. Look at the relationship between India and Japan. See the fact that, or notice the fact, the Indian Prime Minister, our Honorable Prime Minister, recently visiting Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand. Before that, the visit of the Japanese Prime Minister to India, the visit of the Korean President to India. So much. With none of the countries do we have geographical contiguous borders. Maritime reach. Sea power compresses distance and extends influence far beyond continental borders. So, sea power, thinking maritime. Technology, cyber, space, AI, and digital infrastructure all diminish the constraints of all these issues of geography. And influence. Power today is measured less by territorial control than by the ability to shape choices and outcomes, particularly through the issue of narrative dominance, something that we will continue to speak as we go along. The neighborhood that I'm talking about can be summarized into 4 parts, actually, not just one. The land neighborhood, which is where we are very familiar with, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Pakistan, where connectivity and border management dominate. Then there's the maritime neighborhood, Sri Lanka, Maldives, the Indian Ocean or littoral, where HADR and domain awareness matters more than roads. Then there's the digital, the cyber neighborhood. It's a new one we're looking at, where you got to go beyond physicality. Undersea cables, UPI exports, data flows, disinformation, a strategic space with no fixed geography at all. This all forms a part of the neighborhood and important to secure it. The extended functional neighborhood, the Gulf, Central Asia, Indo-Pacific, reaching via the IMEC, Chabahar, trilateral highway, rather than just contiguity. And you will realize this as we go along, the importance of connectivity to the Central Asian republics, the importance of connectivity to Russia through the Trans-North-South Highway, and including to the ASEAN countries through the Great Asian Highway. So the tyranny and the agony of geography can be described just as a recall for you through all these landmarks, from the Himalayas in the north to the man-made disconnect to ASEAN. When I say the man-made disconnect, I essentially mean our inability to get our act together in the northeast to be able to ensure a secure connectivity through Myanmar into Thailand and into the rest of the ASEAN region. Ultimately, this will transpire when full and secure stability is achieved completely in the northeast. Let's look at applying the paradigm. The immediate neighborhood is what we need to look at first. We need not cast our eyes far and wide into the strategic domain that I am just trying to describe for you. It is essential first to ensure the foundation of India's strategic reach, which means stability in your immediate domain immediately first. Essentially through mutual trust, shared prosperity, connectivity, and ensuring assistance in capacity building, security cooperation, and civilizational affinity. What we are constrained about, and you will always understand this very well, is that the state of relationship with Pakistan will always continue to limit us. The inability to get the SAARC together, to push SAARC into some kind of an effectiveness on the lines of what has been achieved in ASEAN, has been a huge constraint for us. But this is something which we are unlikely to overcome for quite some time. In due course, a restoration of relationship with Pakistan could be on the cards, but our security orientation will invariably remain focused in that direction. A Pahalgam a year ago, 2 years later, another Pahalgam. And we are back to square one in terms of your overall centrality of your security thinking. This is something that we have to keep fighting against all the time. However, there is one obstacle in this gap, which acts like a gap, an honest gap, in achieving this relationship with our immediate neighborhood. But essentially, it's the trust deficit. We have to understand we have to practice economic realism, offer competitive alternatives, manage our asymmetry with sensitivity, and ensure that there is no deficit in our delivery. A lot of complaints come from our neighborhood that there is a lot of promise that we do make, but essentially are not in a position to be able to deliver it. For example, India-Bangladesh trade today is just 13 billion. We enjoy 4,000 kilometers of borders, but the potential is so much higher. But constraints due to geopolitical reasons prevents this from probably happening. We must match expectations with outcomes. Neighborhood diplomacy ultimately earns credibility through visible delivery on the ground. If we have a strong economic setup, an economic relationship with our immediate neighborhood, then we are on even ground, on a firm base to be able to reach out to the rest of the world. China. Now, this is an important one, and therefore I shall take this a little more, explain this a little more. China's border dispute with India is often viewed through the narrow prism of unresolved territorial claims. I would submit that this is an incomplete understanding. The boundary dispute is not merely about territory, it is about strategy. For Beijing, an unresolved boundary serves multiple objectives simultaneously. It keeps India strategically preoccupied, compelling us to devote significant military, economic, and political resources to continental defense. Every division deployed in the Himalayas is a division unavailable for other strategic priorities. The dispute also preserves China's coercive bargaining power. The ambiguity of the LAC provides opportunities for calibrated pressure without crossing the threshold of major war. It creates the conditions for what has become a familiar Chinese approach: incremental advances, tactical probes, and what has come to be known very famously as salami slicing. There's another equally important dimension. Tibet remains central to China's national security calculus. The control of Aksai Chin secures the vital Xinjiang-Tibet corridor and provides strategic depth to the Tibetan plateau. Consequently, the border issue is unlikely to disappear because it is embedded in China's perception of its own internal security. An unsettled border also constrains India's strategic options. It compels us to balance continental challenges with maritime ambitions. Finally, the dispute has an important psychological dimension. Through periodic crises, military buildups, and sustained pressure, as we have witnessed in the recent past, Beijing seeks to shape perceptions among its own people, within India and across the international community, of China as the dominant power in Asia. Recall the wolf warrior just a few years ago. From Beijing's perspective, the status quo continues to yield strategic dividends and will continue into an uncertain future. We require military preparedness, certainly, but equally economic strength, technological advancement, maritime capability, strategic partnerships, and national resilience and stamina. In other words, India's response cannot remain confined to the Himalayas. It must extend across the entire spectrum of national power, and that's what we are all talking about here. Let's go to Pakistan, another important state for us. It presents India with a strategic paradox. By most conventional measures of national power, the gap between the two countries, India and Pakistan, continues to widen. Yet Pakistan retains disproportionate strategic relevance. Geography is one reason. Located at the intersection of South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia, Pakistan has repeatedly leveraged location to compensate for economic and political weaknesses. More importantly, it has become China's Western strategic anchor, providing Beijing access towards the Arabian Sea while supporting a relationship extending across military technology, intelligence, and strategic infrastructure. As a nuclear-armed Muslim state, Pakistan also retains geopolitical relevance across the Islamic world and among major powers. Terrorism, proxy warfare, and long-established regional networks further provide asymmetric instruments of influence. Pakistan's greatest strategic success, however, has been in keeping India disproportionately focused on its western flank. India's objective must therefore be to ensure that Pakistan no longer dictates our strategic priorities. Easier said than done, I know. Vigilance, deterrence, and preparedness remain essential. But India's strategic energies must increasingly serve its own rise, economic transformation, technology, maritime power, and wider regional influence, something which I have been repeatedly saying through this talk. Pakistan is India's permanent tactical challenge. China is India's defining strategic challenge. We must not allow the first to distract us from the second. India's objective should be to ensure that Pakistan no longer dictates India's strategic priorities. And we look at Bangladesh, the other important element in our neighborhood. Bangladesh is India's most consequential eastern neighbor, not because of military power, but because of geography. Political instability there has direct implications for border security, migration, and the northeast. The Siliguri corridor remains India's most vulnerable strategic bottleneck, while Bangladesh's location makes it equally important to the emerging competition in the Bay of Bengal. Yet, geography also offers opportunity. Bangladesh can provide vital road, rail, waterway, and port connectivity to the northeast, and we are all aware of that, transforming the northeast's economic prospects. China's expanding footprint therefore requires India's sustained engagement. Influence cannot simply be inherited from just history. India must strengthen the resilience of the Siliguri corridor, maintain credible border preparedness, deepen its Bay of Bengal presence, and simultaneously pursue a comprehensive engagement with Dhaka. A stable and a prosperous Bangladesh is firmly in India's interest, while preparedness for adverse contingencies remain essential. Bangladesh is ultimately the strategic hinge between India's continental security and its maritime future. India's Bangladesh policy must rest on reciprocity and realism, not habit or sentiment. Patience is a strategy, not a default. If you look at the eastern periphery, you'll find these are some of the ways by which we can ensure not coercion, but the management, the coercive management of anything which may happen on our eastern borders. Border force dominance, with the border security force well entrenched there, the resilience of the Siliguri corridor, leverage through the waters issue, strategic proximity of our forces in the immediate proximity there, maritime presence in the North Bay Bengal area particularly, and narrative superiority, reinforcing regional stability through diplomatic and information dominance outreach. Let's talk about Central Asia. In 1992, when the Central Asian republics became independent, free of the Soviet Union, there was great excitement in India. I remember I was a part of the army headquarters in the MI Pakistan setup, and we were hugely excited that here are great prospects for trade, connectivity, etc. 34 years later, we still have no connection with the Cars. Our efforts to try and establish that through Chabahar have not really succeeded. I have just come from a trip to Kyrgyzstan, where I was representing India in a civilizational dialogue over a few days there. And what I noticed most was that the absence of a physical connect with Central Asia has allowed space to be traded. The space which should have been naturally ours, because Central Asia had a great civilizational affinity with us. That space seems to have been compromised to a great extent. And the Chinese, because of their direct strategic connectivity there, common borders, etc., have been able to make much more ingress. However, hope is not lost on this. You're seeing greater stability in Afghanistan today. Of course, unfortunately, Chabahar doesn't seem to be on the cards for the moment. I had a deep discussion with the Minister of Interior and the Deputy Defense Minister in Iran recently, and we felt that our $120 million worth of investment which we have made in Chabahar may not manifest into something immediately. But the hopes are not lost, and we hope that with our approach of looking at West Asia with greater balance, the possibility of Chabahar remaining on the cards will always be there. Some of the issues which Middle East of the Central Asian republics which come up. One important aspect besides these 6 things is the fact that there are 72 million Muslim population which you have in the Car region, the Central Asian republics, all following a very pragmatic, secular, middle path form of Islam. But there are ardent efforts from the extremist world to try and garner influence in this area. Imagine, just remember one thing, ISIS had the maximum fighters actually from Chechnya. Now, Chechnya is not really Central Asia, it's a part of Russia. But still, the fact that it borders Central Asia should wake us up and tell us that there's a potential for recruitment of hordes and hordes of people from Central Asia, if it comes to that. This is something we should be looking at. It is no longer beyond India's neighborhood. It is central to India's continental strategy. West Asia. I think you can teach me more about West Asia than I can lecture you, because everyone is an expert these days. For the last 4 months, you have been reading nothing but West Asia in the headlines. These are some of the issues which come up when we look at West Asia. Our energy security, as I just said, 45% of our energy coming from there. The diaspora, 10 million, and the remittances which come. Maritime choke points, strategic partnerships, which we have established with different countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc. Connectivity and trade through the choke points. and the larger regional stability. Remember the last time when the ISIS issues happened, when all kinds of crises take place in West Asia, the flow over of that is inevitable into India. This is something we have to maintain in mind. Of course, the important thing here is we are one of those nations who've got good relations with everyone in West Asia. But we may need to revisit the overall Gulf doctrine that India follows. Yesterday, I attended a very interesting discussion in the India Foundation based on this particular subject, the revisiting the Indian Gulf doctrine. And we realized that, our good relationships with everyone somehow haven't manifested into anything which gives us a substantial advantage as such. Do we want to put our eggs into one basket somewhere to ensure we garner the maximum? These are issues that we are going to be, which we will have to continue debating for some time. Our very strong relationship with the UAE, for example. Is it at the cost of our relationship with Iran? How do we balance out these relationships? This is going to be something which is very important in the near future. But this region is one of the most important regions as far as India is concerned. Beyond the Bay of Bengal, you have the Indo-Pacific. Let me read you a passage for this while you look at the various points I've outlined for you. If there is one region that will define India's strategic future, it is the Indo-Pacific. This is no longer simply a maritime theater. It is where global trade, technology, supply chains, and geopolitical competition increasingly converge. India's interests therefore extend far beyond the Bay of Bengal. Our response must be equally comprehensive, strengthening maritime capability, deepening partnerships with the ASEAN, Japan, Korea, Australia, and other like-minded nations, while maintaining our strategic autonomy. The Indo-Pacific is not about containing any one country. It is about ensuring a stable, open, and a rule-based region in which India's rise can continue unhindered. In other words, we need to ensure no one counters us and our interest issues which come up in the Indo-Pacific region. In many ways, this represents India's strategic shift from a predominantly continental outlook to one that embraces its maritime destiny. Yet India's engagement with the Indo-Pacific did not begin in the 21st century. It began almost 2,000 years ago, and I will explain that in the act of what India must do subsequently. What must India do? There's another dimension to the Indo-Pacific that deserves greater attention, and this is the issue which I want to highlight. We often describe that region in the Indo-Pacific region in terms of naval deployments, sea lanes, and strategic competition. Yet long before the Indo-Pacific became a geopolitical construct, it was a civilizational space connected by ideas, scholarship, trade, and culture. India's engagement with Southeast Asia did not begin with the Quad. A lot of people may think that the invitation by the United States of America to join Quad in a non-military pact as such was our first approach into the Indo-Pacific. That's incorrect. It began with Nalanda, Bodh Gaya, and the ancient centers of eastern India. And this is a revelation to me now as the governor of Bihar. Let me tell you that. I have become deeply conscious of the fact that the state of Bihar represents far more than a geographical entity. It is the cradle of much of India's civilizational engagement with Asia. From Nalanda, Vikramshila, Bodh Gaya, Rajgir, and Vaishali, all centers of learning. All these areas radiated ideas that shaped societies through knowledge, dialogue, and cultural confidence. Recall, if you have studied history, recall the golden age of the Guptas, the 4th century and the 5th century AD, stretching into the period of Harshvardhana, when you had the visit of the famous Huansang coming to Nalanda. I have often described this as the Nalanda approach, the proposition that India's greatest historical influence in Asia flowed not from military power, but from the intellectual leadership and civilizational openness. The challenge today is to convert that inherence into strategic advantage through universities academic exchanges, Buddhist circuits, research partnerships, and cultural diplomacy. Soft power alone is insufficient, but when complemented by credible hard power, it becomes a powerful instrument of statecraft. The recent visit by our Prime Minister into the Indo-Pacific region, and a map I'll show you of the countries with whom we now have a growing military-to-military relationship, where the BrahMos missile is evident by its presence. This itself is an element of hard power, which now needs to be also balanced with the element of soft power, which I am talking about. So matching strategy with capability, integrated, these are the issues we need to look at when we are reaching out to many of the countries with whom I'm talking about soft power. You need integrated national power. You need joint military capability. You need maritime reach, technological superiority, a whole of government coordination. It can't be a MEA's job or the MOD's job alone. This has to be a whole of government approach. And the very, very important aspect of narrative management, strategic communication. This is India's complete strategic toolkit, which I was referring to. Hard power, economic power trade, civilizational power, diplomatic power, technological power, and maritime power. A lethal combination. These 6 issues put together form the element, the basic element of India's future doctrine for its strategic neighborhood. Hard power as diplomacy. The BrahMos, as you can see. You've got not alone BrahMos, but defense exports is a strategic influence. Building partner capacity with all these nations to whom we have sold and provided the BrahMos. Strengthening our overall regional deterrence, balancing coercion through credible capability, enhancing the capability of the partner nations. Reinforcing a free and an open Indo-Pacific. Recently, if you notice what has happened, a lot of nations have got together and supported the Chinese for the last time on the issue of the South China Sea islands. Just recently it's happened. And strategic autonomy with a strategic responsibility. When I went to Central Asia, I'm coming to the end of my talk. When I went to Central Asia recently, we tried this aspect of civilizational statecraft, bringing civilizational statecraft to the fore, bringing all this connect to the Central Asian regions, knowledge through power, dialogue through shared learning and understanding, partnerships through shared heritage. I think we do not have a reasonable understanding of the strength of civilizational outreach yet. It will happen in due course. Remember, Central Asia also had a Buddhist connect. The whole of ASEAN has a Buddhist connect. We are already welcoming every visitor coming from ASEAN is usually coming first to Nalanda, coming first to Gaya, landing there. I've received 3 of them so far. And in 4 months. And that is something which will make a huge difference into the future. And we have a great asset in the form of the Nalanda University at Gaya at the moment, which is a university run under the Ministry of External Affairs, doing great work, having people from 30 countries coming in to study there. This is authentic soft power with civilization as a national influence. Universities, as I said, are the best. What is India's greatest strategic advantage? The fact, which I'll reinforce later, is the fact that our neighborhood may not trust us that much, but the extended neighborhood tends to trust us much more. No revisionist legacy. We are a trusted strategic partner. Everyone knows we have no extraterritorial ambitions. We are a net security provider. We are attempting a civilizational connect, and I hope this will become stronger as we go along. We work on strategic autonomy with no nation being able to impinge its national interests on our national interests, with development being the priority and not dominance. The greatest strategic advantage is that countries around the world are comfortable with India's rise. Who is comfortable with China's rise? One can't say. Takeaways from this talk. The fact, this is particularly for my audience across online, the neighborhood has expanded. We are no longer looking at just the immediate neighborhood. Just remember, geography should not be considered as a constraint. Geography gives way to geometry, and geometry is a result of our alignments of our outreach. Continental and maritime security are one. We cannot just put continental security as the first priority. Maritime and continental have to balance each other. We have to manage both our immediate and our extended neighborhoods simultaneously. Without managing your immediate neighborhood, the possibility of succeeding in the management of your extended neighborhood will be remote. Influence is the new currency of power. Hard power is a part of this, very much as a part of the joint strategy. And trust is India's greatest strategic advantage. The challenge before India is not merely to defend its borders, but to shape the strategic environment well beyond them. A historic civilizational link exists between India and several regions of the strategic neighborhood. We need to study the Nalanda approach as a model of diplomacy and implement it. Balance soft power with our hard power. Leaving a thought behind with you, where geography becomes strategy. Look at the Babel, look at the area of the Hormuz, the Arc of the Malacca. And look at the map on the top, the Quiet Arc. It connects up all those countries where the BrahMos missile is existing today. Our outreach has gone there and needs to go beyond. The success of India's neighborhood strategy will be measured not by the number of countries it influences, but by the number that willingly choose to partner with India. Power commands attention. Trust creates influence. India must possess both. The trust portion is a very important element. Thank you very much for your patience. Jai Hind. Want me to sit there?
Thank you very much, General Asnain, for a most erudite and interesting conceptualization of our national security. In my introduction, I forgot to mention one thing about Air Commodore Jasjit Singh, which I was reminded of listening to you. I think in 2010, when I was editor of Business Standard, Air Commodore Jasjit Singh called me and said that the University Grants Commission had set up a committee to draw up syllabi for national security studies and had made him the chairman of that committee with professors from several universities. And then he invited me saying, I want you also to join. So I said to him, sir, what national security studies? I'm an economist. Nene bhai, we need to bring in your perspective into our national security studies. Because all these other members of this committee are professors of international relations and, they don't understand economics. That, as you very well know, sir, has been my contribution to our thinking on national security over the years, that what you talk about as a revenge of geography, which is absolutely an extremely important challenge that we are dealing with, there is an equally important revenge, the revenge of the economy. The expansion of enlargement of the strategic neighborhood, which is absolutely true. as we have seen over the last 3 decades, is a function of the enlargement of our economic footprint. Sir, ASEAN, the Indo-Pacific, have become important for us after 91 as our economy became more outward looking and our share of world trade began to increase. We realized that countries that matter to us as economic partners are as important to us as our own neighbors. So our neighborhood expanded because our economy expanded. So the only supplement I would add to your fascinating conceptualization of changing strategic geography for India is that at the core of this expansion is really India's economic expansion. Even the role of China. I've always maintained, and this is where I've disagreed with many of my friends who practice geopolitics, study geopolitics and international relations, that China has been a bigger economic challenge than a security challenge. In fact, it is China's economic challenge which is our security challenge. You know very well that we have been able to deal with China as a military challenge time and again. But it is the economic challenge that China poses in our immediate neighborhood and in this wider neighborhood. It is today, I remember in 2001, writing a paper for the National Security Advisory Board, drawing attention to the fact that by 2001, from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, China had overtaken us as the largest trade partner of all these countries, except at that time of Nepal and Bhutan. And subsequently, even with Nepal, it became the single largest trading partner. And I believe even with Bhutan, it's catching up. I was recently in China for a conference, and it was quite interesting to see a Bhutanese participant in that conference in China. So therefore, I would present to you for your consideration the view that this enlargement of the strategic neighborhood, which you have captured so well, is not merely the revenge of geography, but also the revenge of the economy. That unless we catch up on the economic front, we will not be able to either use our hard power or our soft power effectively vis-a-vis China. With those remarks, sir, I'll open up for question answers and look forward to your response. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. I will identify you, the lady here, and then you introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello. Good morning, sir. I'm Radhe Tambi, Associate Fellow at CAPS. Thank you for such an enriching talk. My question is, how do you see the revival of SAARC? Particularly, we have recently seen in this month Bangladesh raising this issue of reviving, and just on Sunday when Maldives was celebrating its 61st Independence Day, we saw President Moiso also raising this demand that we must revive SAARC. So how do you see that India playing its role? Should we do it or not? Thank you.
I'll take 3 questions at a time and come back to General Hussain. Yes, that gentleman there.
Good morning, esteemed panelists. This side Sachin Yadav from the Indian Council of World Affairs. My question is, sir, from past 5 years, India's immediate neighborhood, that is South Asia, is going through a chain of changes. We have seen Taliban in Afghanistan, then a military coup in Myanmar, then we have seen changes of government in Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So I want to know is how these changes are impacting India's impacting South Asia, and what are these implications on India?
Thank you. Dr. Chawla.
Thank you, General Hasnan, for a brilliant talk, and it's a pleasure listening to you after a long time. Sir, you talked about the trust deficit in the beginning of your talk, and then you talked about that as a strength also for India. But trust deficit and anxiety in our immediate neighborhood has been a consistent factor. Even when we have invested significantly economically and we have been the first responder in the natural calamities, trust deficit remains. So, sir, in your view, is it lapses in India's posturing or strategic communication to be able to convey the trust? Or it's the strategic interests and growing engagement of the external actors like China, and now through China, even Pakistan, like we see in Bangladesh. These are the direct beneficiary of India's trust deficit. So, I mean, trust deficit between amongst the neighbors. So, how do you see like we overcoming this challenge if that's the factor in your case?
The inevitable question about SARC. And I did try to address it through one slide somewhere in a small blurb coming out to say that yes, we need to look at our immediate neighborhood. It's a very important thing. As I spoke about the firm base, it's important to have a firm base for you to be able to reach out to the rest of the world. But we've always got to factor in this aspect that Pakistan is going to be there. And if Pakistan is there, let's not try and beat around the bush to say that, yes, we can work around it. BIMSTEC has taken place, etc., has taken place. No doubt, all these are very, very important alignments which have happened. But SARC itself would have been something which would have been on the lines of ASEAN, perhaps. Remember the state of ASEAN in 1997 when the collapse of the tiger economy took place at that time. And where have they risen from 1997? The same story could have been told in South Asia too, except for the fact that Pakistan would not cooperate. Now, we have to find ways of ensuring this, of optimizing a South Asia without Pakistan. That is the need. We need to put our minds to it. We need to have a doctrine perhaps around which we work around situations which keep building up from time to time. But the fact remains that we have to keep looking east, more east, skip Pakistan, look at West Asia, include West Asia into the ambit of what we are looking at South Asia and what we could have achieved in South Asia if Pakistan was there, perhaps to extend it into other areas too. But as I said, this constraint is not going to go away. A lot of people think that perhaps the situation may improve 2 years, 3 years down the line. But I can assure you, as long as the Pakistan army remains in control in Pakistan, this is very, very unlikely to happen. And therefore, we will have to live with this constraint, continue trying to optimize with whatever we can. You've seen recently, in the last few weeks, you have seen our sudden turn towards the Act East policy as such. You've seen the visits from Japan, from Korea, the visits of our Honorable Prime Minister to Philippines, to Indonesia, going down to the South Pacific and places like that. Obviously, so there's fresh thinking, a lot of fresh thinking which is going on this, that we have not paid enough attention to this area perhaps, and we need to do much more about it. That's the way that we'll have to continue progressing. As far as the turmoil in South Asia is concerned, that is the question, isn't it? Someone who had asked. Yeah. The turmoil in South Asia is what you are referring to. Is that right? Yeah. The overall turmoil in South Asia and how we need to optimize our situation out of that. I think India is doing rather well at the moment. Despite the fact that West Asia is a major constraint, despite the fact that it could have had a major effect on our economy, it's not so far, at least doesn't look to be that marked as we would have expected. Bangladesh definitely is a worrisome area. And as we are going along, the dynamics are going to continue challenging us, particularly with the return of Sheikh Hasina, possibly at the end of the year. We don't know whether it's going to happen or not. That is going to cause a tremendously challenging situation for us. Nepal, the constraints in Nepal at the moment Sri Lanka seems to be a stable, reasonably good, stable situation for the moment, but we are looking at the near future. We don't know what's going to really happen. So the immediate neighborhood where the worrisome things were there, that is at the moment under wraps. Pakistan, too busy at the moment with Afghanistan, too busy with internal security, too busy attempting to raise its own stakes as far as the Iran-Israel-US war is concerned, is leaving India a lot of space at the moment to look after its interests overall. But all this can be upset hugely if some major challenge comes from our western border again. Unlike, to my mind, my perception, something coming from the northern borders at this stage, very unlikely. Although in April 2020, we were surprised. We were surprised against the run completely at that time, and these kind of things happen against the run, normally. But considering all rationale, I don't think that kind of a situation should emerge at all as far as the LAC is concerned or those areas are concerned. It's important that we build up our maritime capability in this, and we are happy that the white is getting much more primacy in our thinking overall, because trade will matter. As Dr. Baru just said, it is economy, the revenge of economy. And economy ultimately will depend on trade, a tremendous amount on trade. And the security of our trade routes, our sea routes, will make all the difference. Particularly the sea routes going towards the Straits of Malacca, the sea routes going into the Bab al-Mandab and those areas. Those will all make a difference. So I'm glad that that is getting the primacy that it deserves. Shalini, what was your question? Now I'm forgetting it exactly. Trust deficit with the neighboring nations. I did allude to the fact that in the last slide, second last slide, that the trust with other nations around the periphery, beyond our immediate neighborhood, is high. The expectations from India that we do not have territorial ambitions, our rise is a peaceful rise, unlike, as I described, the rise of China. But as far as our immediate neighborhood is concerned, yes, there is a level of suspicion at most times. I think we did well by managing two particular situations. One was in the Maldives, which we did, I think, rather well, reversing it and turning it around to our favor. And the other was in Sri Lanka, the $4 billion so-called loan, which apparently is almost like assistance, the $4 billion loan at a time when Sri Lankan economy was down and out completely, has helped us tremendously. Our challenge, we've done well with Afghanistan. If you consider Afghanistan as our immediate neighborhood too, we've done reasonably well with them. Out of most countries who have established relations with Afghanistan, we are probably one of the leading nations. Myanmar, I had the pleasure of receiving the Myanmar president at Gaya and exchanging a few words with him. A visit by the Myanmar president. Myanmar is always a problem issue for us, I know, but things are improving on that front. I think the major challenge, of course, lies with China, where we cannot really trust to that extent or establish that kind of trust, and greatly with Bangladesh. We have to work more on our narratives. I think we have done well as far as our outreach through economic means and things of that nature. With Bangladesh, more can be done. But one of the things that all of us in the strategic community generally understand about India is the weakness of our narrative management, storytelling. The ability to tell our story correctly, to inspire confidence in our own stories. This is something that we will have to work on in a world of social media, in a world of greater transparency, etc. Thank you. This gentleman here.
The gentleman on your right, first.
Hello. Well, sir, it was a very real, eye-opening and also brain-opening talk by sir. And I am Vimal Chopra. I have been in the industry for 45 years. Now I call myself energy, safety, security and sustainability expert. Well, the question first, sir, I was going to ask you about Bangladesh. You partly answered that, but still that you just answered previously. I want to ask you, sir, that do you really think, in view of the Bangladesh being a minority and a very, I will say, religious-oriented country, even with the economy, even with the, giving them power and also giving them, you feel it is so? And the part B, sir, is to you, Sanjay, sir. When you said that more than the geographical revenge is the energy, you said economic revenge. So I would slightly add to that and just show a picture of how they are using their energy or their in their technological advancement to use this energy revenge on us. Very small energy. Every part of any, I'll just explain you, sir. Every part of every battery, which is going to be one of the major sources.
So what's the question?
The
Please
question
be
is that
clear.
how do we change this by an example of China itself following? The PLA gives the funds
No, what?
to each and
Please,
every industry.
no,
So can we
don't
do
give a
it?
lecture. Please, what's your question?
Can we do it in India, sir? Can we get the defense forces to insist on giving industry the basic technology, the funds for that? Can we do it in India, sir?
Okay.
That's my question. That's my concern.
Still not clear to me, but I'll leave it to you. Air Marshal Kapil Kak. Yeah.
Thank you, General, for a fascinating, long look at how India will play its cards in the grand strategic neighborhood, if I can term it that. I normally don't ask questions here, but I was somewhat intrigued by the fact that when we take that long look, 2047, there'll be three great powers in the world: the United States, China, and possibly India, if we do our act right. How did you, was it a deliberate choice, to lose out the kind of role United States will play in that rise of India? I say this in the context of some changes that have taken place in the deep state in the US, and this is a matter of months. Firstly, the US National Security Strategy 2026 very indirectly refers to India's possible rise, which US will not accept. This was repeated by high officials of, I don't want to name them, take time, at least 3 or 4 very senior officials of the US government, directly talking about India not having to be strengthened to serve US and Indian joint interests.
Got it, Kapil?
But how will you, the basic question is,
Thanks.
where do you see US-India relations and how do we calibrate that relationship? Thank you.
Important question. The gentleman right behind you there, yeah.
Good morning, I'm Colonel Rajiv Agarwal. I'm from Chintan Research Foundation. Thank you, sir, for a fascinating lecture. Always a pleasure to listen to your absolute masterclass. Sir, when we're talking of the India's strategic outreach into its extended neighborhood and the influence that it desires to achieve, one of the most important thing is how do we reach that extended neighborhood, and that is where the connectivity becomes very important. You alluded a bit about how Chabar has become an important point, and how we are not able to exploit our reach into Central Asian Republic because of what is happening in Chabar, of which we are still hopeful. So whether it is Chabar or the IMEC, Eastern Maritime Corridor, trilateral connectivity, if these projects are inhibited by conflicts and choke point, the 2 Cs, how do we move ahead in extending our influence into the extended neighborhood?
Thank you.
I'll go in the reverse order because yours is the recent question immediately impinging on the mind. Thank you. Very interesting questions, all of them. Very interesting. I'll come back to Kapil Kak, sir, in greater detail. Rajiv, your question immediately throws up an issue. Yes, physical connectivity lacking. As I told you, Northeast, Moreh should have been active. It should have been a trade center. Guwahati by now should have been thriving absolutely as a nodal center for all the Act East trade that would have taken place along the road. Malacca would have been declared as relatively less important when you have that kind of a connectivity, but we have not been able to get that act together, somehow due to various geostrategic, geopolitical, different internal security constraints, etc. The similar thing is with Chabahar, where we have not been able to get that outreach into Afghanistan, and we have not been able to get that outreach into Central Asia, to the North-South corridor. These two examples are the most important ones, I suppose, which you are referring to. And that's the reason why, if you see in my rationalization, I had looked at the civilizational approach. You see, why should you say that your relationship has to be based on physical connectivity? After all, the United States and Japan have got the entire ocean between them, and so many other areas you can see. Colonial powers went around the world establishing hard power, soft power, trade power, economic power, everything together. Why should physical connectivity restrain you? And this throws up then the idea of India's, yesterday you were there yesterday, we were discussing this whole issue of soft power outreach. I said West Asia, for example. What restricts, why has Al Jazeera made such a difference in Qatar? Why hasn't NDTV got an office in UAE? And why isn't it beaming from there? Why is India today not making a beaming out from Kuwait or from Singapore? Media, think tanks. Why does the India Foundation or the Vivekananda International Foundation not have an office in Manama? If IISS can have the Manama dialogue, why not a dialogue of this kind? There are different elements and different ways of outreach that you can do. Why can't Ashoka University have a campus in Tashkent? You see, we'll have to think differently. Soft power outreach is not just hearts and minds of the Kashmir kind. It is strategic, super strategic in nature and content. That is what we will have to look at. And I think we are looking at it already. My description of the Nalanda approach was a very nascent baby step towards changing our overall thinking, nothing else. See, we had a civilization. If in the 4th century we could spread our culture into Bali and Borneo, Indonesia and Philippines, what restricts us from doing it today, of having that connect today? That's the way I would look at it. So, I think you opened up a issue, Kapil Kak sir. Actually, when I looked at my own presentation in the morning, I too realized the question which you are asking. That in my entire stretch of the strategic neighborhood, I hadn't spoken of the United States. I did not speak of the United States. Now, I admit that it was all in the mind, it was hidden somewhere, spoken about here and there, but it was not specifically referred to. There is no doubt the United States is not our neighbor. But mentally, in one way, with the presence of the United States in the Pacific, in the Western Pacific particularly, its interests in the Indian Ocean, it becomes willy-nilly our neighbor too. And if I was given a second chance to deliver this talk, perhaps I would have had 2 slides on it. Thanks for opening up that issue. There's no doubt about it, Indo-US relations took a long time in coming. We have all lived through the era of the 60s and the 70s, when in mind all of us were looking at Washington. We wanted to live in New York. We wanted to eat McDonald's. But none of us most of us from that generation ever got that opportunity. It's only after 1991 that that relationship built up, and we thrived on it. We've done well with that relationship. I don't think we can do without that relationship in the future if we want to see ourselves going to a $10 trillion, $15 trillion, $20 trillion economy in the future. So, while expanding our interests into the expanded strategic neighborhood, one of the things which we'll have to keep in mind at all times is not to counter the interests of the United States of America and yet retain our strategic autonomy. Now, this is going to be a major challenge. I agree. So, this is going to be a major challenge for us. And it's being demonstrated at the moment in West Asia, where our major interest lies in having a relationship with Iran. I can assure you my 8 to 10 hours in Iran and one visit before that in 2019 gave me that change of mind to say this is a country we need to do business with. Right? But Chabahar, we'll have to keep waiting. We have spoken of a civilizational relationship with Iran, and Iran keeps telling us we are waiting to see when that civilizations come together. So these constraints are all there. Constraints will remain there because of our relationship with the United States. And we of all countries, and one of the major deductions from that slide which says that we have good relations with everyone in West Asia. One of the major constraints is the fact that we have got good relations with everyone. If we had bad relations with someone, we could have put our all our eggs into one basket and perhaps thrived from that. But we've got good relations with everyone. And we will have to build up on those good relations to ensure that we continue working on our national interests at all times. I won't go beyond that, sir. You understand it very well, but your point is very well taken. And I think in the takeaways, I would add this point. That the United States will always continue to play a major role in India's strategic thinking, even while we look at an expanded neighborhood. And my last, the question of, the way I understood your question, Bangladesh, I know you went around the thing with lots of issues that were there in your mind, but what I can see is that you were primarily looking at an economic kind of an outreach with Bangladesh. As I said, we've got a $13 billion trade, the last figures that we have got with us. And the potential is huge. We've got land borders from all directions with the Bangladesh. But somehow now hopefully with the West Bengal, you know, our overall strategic thinking changing in West Bengal and places like that, the border management being of a different type in the near future, we will start hopefully looking at a potential strategic connectivity into Bangladesh, across trans-Bangladesh into Tripura, Mizoram and those areas, to allow Bangladesh also the benefits of our own internal trade more than anything else. Besides the fact that if things are stable in Bangladesh, if things are stable there, our northeast is stable, automatically it benefits us from our outreach into the eastern region, into Southeast Asia. The famous Southeast Asian highway, which we keep talking about, remains only in the dream. But I aspire to see Guwahati, Silchar, Dimapur, Moreh, and places like that all develop and become a part of this Eastern Highway. Thank you.
Well, we have run out of time, but I'll give the last question to you from IDSA.
I'm Ruchita Berry, formerly from IDSA, now with Vivekananda International. Thank you for a thought-provoking lecture, General Hassan. And I would like to question, you had reimagined India's strategic neighborhood. But don't you think Africa also has a place in the reimagined strategic neighborhood? Because whether it's the critical minerals or whether it is the strategic location, and also the fact that, look at India's
I got your question,
engagement.
Your question is absolutely clear. Perhaps a little bit of a restraint of time, nothing else. But my first slide, if you saw the opening slide, I did show Tanzania. And I did show a portion of the African coastline. My one visit, a year-long stay in Africa, in Mozambique, with the United Nations, in Rwanda, the height of the genocide in Rwanda, gave me a tremendous opening to understand parts of Africa. And I did realize that Africa is not as far as we think it is. It's not. we do not, it doesn't classify into a strategic outreach yet, but yet, yes, you're right, absolutely. The future of critical minerals, critical items of that kind, rare earths, all lies there. And we need to wake up to it. The Chinese woke up to it much earlier, have gone, acquired areas which will come to their benefit in the future. We need to look at it. We need to look at it in a wider way. At least if we have moved out of our immediate neighborhood and started looking at a slightly expanded neighborhood, to my mind, it is good enough for the moment. But yes, your point is very well taken. We need to identify the right countries, particularly along the IOR, the Indian Ocean Rim area, with whom we need to have that kind of a strategic or maybe a civilizational relationship. We know that there have been maritime relationships between the west coast of India and the east coast of Africa. Maybe a revival of those would be necessary at some stage. But your point is very well taken. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think there's been an extremely erudite presentation and very, very interesting discussion. Thank you for all those interesting questions. I now invite DG Caps to make his closing remarks.
Hey, thank you very much, sir. And there is just no way that he can even start thinking about having the final word after such luminaries have already spoken. So, His Excellency, the Honorable Governor, thank you very much for your presence here today, sir. And thank you very much for this talk. Dr. Sanjay Baru, thank you very much for having moderated this session. The Air Chief, thank you very much, sir, for your presence here today. And ma'am, all the distinguished visitors to this hall today, thank you very much for honoring the memory of Air Commodore Jasjeet Singh. We hope to be able to continue this good work forward. And last of all, I would be failing in my duty if I do not thank Western Air Command and the Indian Air Force in general for having continued to support this organization administratively over a long period of time. We hope not to put too many demands on you, but we hope also that whatever small we put, we'll keep getting honored. Thank you very much. I now request Air Chief Marshal AP sir to please come up on the stage and hand over a small token to the Honorable Governor.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I request you to kindly rise for the national song, followed by the national anthem.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam Suphalam, Malayaj Sheetalam, Shashya Shamalam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Jyotsanaam Pulakit Yamini, Fulla Kusumit Drumagal Shobhini, Suhasini Sumadhura Bhashini, Sukhadam Varad जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.